particular contemporary issues from the perspective of hope. Okay, so let's look at the signs of our times. After surveying the cultural and social landscape, let me first begin by offering for reflection just one sign of the time before moving into the rich storehouse of our Dominican heritage and tradition for a possible response. As we look at our contemporary world, one of the most disturbing cultural and social phenomena has been marked by a decrease of public civility. Who can deny the lack of civility and respect in both public and cultural arenas? 2 years ago, in the presence of the entire Congress and on national television, Representative Joe Wilson shouted out at President Obama, "You lie." Remember that? In the semifinals of the U.S. Open that same year, both Serena Williams and Roger Federer both had discourteous meltdowns and drive on any major highway in the U.S. and you are sure to encounter road rage, often incited by those showing a lack of civility and respect for others. And we also know not all that long ago, the bombings in Boston are radically connected to this. Lack of civility and respect for people. The growing lack of civility in our cultural arena is a sign of the times we cannot afford to neglect or deny, for it reveals a more alarming and deep-seated crisis of meaning in our time. Addressing the question of civility and respect, we would do our best to start with a description of the larger social and global context in which we find ourselves in discerning possible causes for the underlying tension and hostility that is expressed in such behavior. If we are truly reading the signs of the times, the reasons appear to be obvious. Terrorism and violence have entered our lives in new ways in the U.S., starting with 9/11, haven't they? Resulting in the deaths of thousands of people and engaging many of the world's nations in a war that appears to be difficult to win. Closer to home, we have civilians being shot and killed in our city streets, in our elementary school classrooms, and in movie theaters, sparking debates about gun control. Some in the West aren't really sure whether Muslims are here or abroad are open to religious freedom and civil tolerance for those of other faith traditions. This perceived lack of safety, whether real or imagined, causes stress. Presently, the media is telling us that we are slowly emerging from an economic recession, but many of us still know of people losing jobs, while the global financial crisis is still affecting many around the globe, especially the poor. Perhaps the most irritating reality is that the majority of those who caused the world's financial problems have shown little or no remorse for their own participation in its failure. They are even benefiting from the various national efforts at recovery. These are just a few of the issues that are at root of our cultural lack of civility and respect, and the list goes on and on. I'm sure if I were to ask you, you could add to this list as well. So let's admit it. It's no surprise that people are on edge. In fact, our present age has been described by many social commentators as the age of rage. Thanks to those who have been most influential in our lives and in our religious traditions, we know that there are better ways of responding to the challenges that life throws our way by choosing, and I say this again, by choosing to be civil, courteous, and polite as we all encounter even those that disagree with us, those who are considered other. The civil behavior which we afford to one another springs from and is grounded in Scripture and in Catholic social teaching, both of which call us to reverence one another as those made in the image and likeness of God, sisters and brothers who are indeed bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh, as Genesis invites us to understand. This ability calls for a growing trust in the other, an appreciation of his or her point of view, even though we may see it as being erroneous, misguided, or far from the truth. The reverence we have for one another, expressed in both personal relationships and in civil discourse, can only be created and maintained by boundaries such as the appropriate use of language, if fruitful dialogue around contemporary issues are to be achieved. The polarization found around social issues has even affected the church. This polarization must stop, otherwise our identity and our integrity as a faith community will be torn asunder, and Catholicism will cease to be an elevating force of change in our world. How can we decrease the polarization found among those who label themselves or others as conservative, liberal, or moderate? A vital first step is to seek out our common ground in the major areas where most Catholics agree, around issues of religious liberty, the sacredness of all of life, the support for social programs that provide a safety net for the poor, the elimination of segregation, racism, sexism, and discrimination, and a respect for differing religious and social traditions and diverse cultures, to name but a few. How do we look for common ground? Few are the Catholics who do not share some of these principles, which provide an established ground even in the midst of difficult conversations. We also need to find a way to foster respectful civil debate and dialogue on how to incorporate and share our values in a pluralistic society, recognizing the distinction between moral principles and their application. We can disagree in good conscience on the way such principles are prudently applied in the public sphere, but we have to have the hard conversations. Even when disagreeing over the concrete applications of moral principles, we also must respect the goodwill of those with whom we disagree. Tolerance, charity, and respect are not weasel words, nor are they excuses to cover over or mask legitimate differences between Catholics and the larger society as a whole. There's hard work to be done here, friends, isn't there? Would you agree? Shake your head. There's hard work to be done here. You know, rather than, in our witnessing to be a model for others, our bishops must take the lead in hosting conversations based on mutual respect and civil discourse within the wider Catholic community. It is good to be reminded in this 50th anniversary of the Second Vatican Council that was noted, quoting this, bishops should make it their special care to approach men, and really we'll say people, right? To approach people and initiate, promote dialogue with them. These faith-based discussions should be marked by charity of expression as well as by humility and courtesy, so that truth may be combined with charity, understanding with love. That's a quote from the Second Vatican Council. So, that being the context, let's look at retrieving and reappropriating from our Dominican heritage. As a possible response to the issues of civility and respect in our society as it relates to both the dignity of the human person and the common good, we look to our ancestors in the faith who of us has not heard the story of the goodness of creation, and particularly of our brother Dominic, who then meets up with an innkeeper. If you don't know this story, this is such a big piece of our Dominican tradition. Dominic de Guzman, who starts the order of preachers, the Dominicans, has a conversation with an innkeeper that lasts into the middle of the night. And this is one of those treasured memories of St. Dominic and of his all-night discussion with this innkeeper in Toulouse, France. This innkeeper was very sympathetic to the Albigensian movement, which had sunken deep roots into southern France at the time of Dominic. And as they spoke, Dominic's own civility was apparent and was modeled in his treatment of this so-called heretic. Albigensianism was seen as a heretical movement. And so there was a big distinction going on, those who were with the church and those who were outside of the church because of this particular movement. I won't get into Albigensianism right now because that's a whole another evening of reflection. We'll Google it. Look up Albigensianism, okay? And so it was a heretical movement. But Dominic's deference to the man was grounded in his own belief in the incarnation, and therefore in the inherent goodness of creation, particularly in this brother, in this person, in this so-called heretic who sat across the table from him. Before this man was a heretic, he was a child of God. The first posture is recognizing the other first as a child of God, who shared the same dignity and common humanity as Dominic himself. The simple way in which St. Dominic listened and reverently acknowledged the image of God before him was an affirmation of the presence of God in his dialogue partner. It was in his deep, respectful listening and grace-filled words that the Spirit of God was revealed in the innkeeper and to the innkeeper, who ultimately, because of the conversation, returned to the faith. Dominic models what we're talking about here. This kind of conversation, grounded both in respectful listening by both parties and grace-filled words of truth, veritas, is the condition for the dialogue and is what we call disputatio. Say that with me. Disputatio. Now at your next cocktail party, throw that word. Disputatio. It's a posture of respectful disagreement. How do we do that? And so we could even venture to say that in this conversation, Dominic came to a deeper and more nuanced insight into the truth, which he himself was preaching because he took the time for respectful listening. Disputatio historically was part of the system of education in Dominic's time. Disputations offered a formalized method of debate designed to uncover and establish truths in theology and in related sciences. Fixed rules or boundaries governed the process of disputatio. They demanded dependence on traditional written authorities and a thorough understanding on all sides of an argument. Dominic used this educative, formative process to build bridges with those like the innkeeper, whom he disagreed with theologically. His aim was truth and not the diminishment of the other person. So let's be clear about that. The goal is not to demonize the other, to mudsling the other. The goal is truth, but always recognizing the dignity of the other person, of the neighbor. And I'm suggesting that a retrieval and a reappropriation of this tradition is necessary today to address the lack of civility and respect so prevalent in our contemporary society. By retrieval, I simply mean searching and rediscovering this buried treasure from our storehouse of Dominican tradition. What we have done in the past has proved so significant in our preaching of the good news. We need to go back and bring it forward to our time today. By reappropriation of disputatio, I mean recognizing we must do so in a new cultural, social, and religious milieu. How do we take that formative aspect, bring it to today so it addresses modern day issues and problems? And in other words, to affect our preaching and our living, and we do so incarnationally. To do so, we must adapt the process accordingly. A reappropriated understanding of disputatio is to be a special kind of search for truth, for veritas, which first and foremost recognizes the dignity of our conversation partners. This does not mean we do so naively, but we do so with discretion and prudence, and we freely choose to see them and love them as God sees them and loves them, which is a very high calling indeed. So the person at the table with us is not the issue. They're a person first. Do they bring issues? Yes. When I was the vicar provincial of my province, and the socius, we were always dealing, not the good things of the brothers, but also the challenging things. The sisters, it's the same way. And so I used to say, my Dominican brothers don't have issues. They have subscriptions. So, to see the other as the image of God in no matter which situation is the right posture to start. Disputatio requires a respectful listening in dialogue that is open to truth and is perceived and put forth by each in the conversation. It's a method of a give and take, a refinement of ideas and possible solutions to the great challenges and crises of our day. Today, as we sit here, we are certainly mindful of the tragedies and natural disasters facing people around the world, right? Hurricane Sandy, which is geographically close to here. The tsunamis, sinkholes, record heat in Australia, earthquakes in Japan, and who of us can forget the people of Haiti? And then the people of New Orleans, where I just came from, before coming to St. Louis. New Orleans is off the chart now, huh? We forget about that, but people's lives, it's better, it's not back to where it was. Perhaps a number of us present here today have actively discerned and dialogued on how best this college community and the local community can respond to some, if not all, those issues. And there are no doubt many opinions on how to best respond, many truths, and I would venture to say some of these might be at odds with each other, right? Disputatio, as Dominicans have come to understand it, encourages participants to discover through civil and respectful interaction of two or maybe more valid and apparent opposing viewpoints that a third possible posture might come from the conversation. A third possible outcome may come from active listening. This might even serve as a conversation moment for one or both in the dialogue. This might even serve as a conversion moment for those in the dialogue, if you're open. This new insight, birthed from the Holy Spirit's promptings, can cause a refocusing or a reframing that ultimately invites participants in the dialogue to move forward to a new place, to a new understanding, to perhaps a better perspective. For this new vantage point, this conversation partner can recognize and embrace the truth, both of their own shared common dignity and humanity, as well as gaining new insight and even new knowledge in the service of the progress of peoples. Disputatio, founded on the profound trust in God's work in the dialogue, can yield new life in a new direction. In other words, disputatio is not a negative, competitive, combative approach to a discussion about establishing hard data and sound interpretation, whether in the theological realm or other realms. For Dominicans, disputatio is a way of analyzing differences, gaining knowledge, listening to, and respecting others with the objective of finding new ways to think and act in the world. In other words, in this kind of dialogue, where the means are consistent with the ends, if I do not recognize the dignity and act civilly towards my conversation partner who sits before me, I have to really question my motives in wanting to truly address the real issues of great social and global importance that are in front of us. It's not about setting up ideological camps where some emerge as winners and others are losers. It's not about blue states versus red states. It's not about CNN versus Fox News. Can I get an amen? I see eyebrows going down. It's not about creating insider versus outsider relationships. It's not about demonizing the other because he or she does not agree with me. A reappropriated understanding of disputatio challenges the attitude so prevalent in our culture, which says this: if you are not with us, you're against us. And if you are against us, then you are the enemy. And if you are the enemy, then I can easily deny our common dignity and shared humanity. And if we travel down that path willingly, violence and revenge are inevitable. Think about that. Think about, where did apartheid come from? When we don't see, when you're different from me, and then I can in my head say, well then, you're less than human. And when you're less than human, we can rationalize away all kinds of behaviors. It's wrong. Sad to say, our culture favors conflict and antagonism over dialogue and respectful listening. These adversarial forms of discourse too often are employed gratuitously without consideration of the good of the parties involved. Think about it. Flamboyant litigation techniques and rhetoric in the courtroom. Attacking politicians with half-truths or lies, whether in the Capitol or in the town hall meeting, and making TV's talking heads more entertaining by misrepresenting facts or focusing on the most salacious details of celebrities' personal lives. All that is fodder for the conversation. Such public speak hinders rather than helps public discourse by affecting or infecting how we proceed to address gridlock issues that threaten to paralyze our society. We need a large dose of respectful dialogue to highlight our common ground rather than our differences, to help us reserve judgment until we have considered a variety of ways to approach a controversial issue, and to motivate us to concede the merits of the other side, even when it pains us to do so. We need this special kind of dialogue to bring hidden assumptions to the surface, where they can be examined, questioned in the light of both gospel values and the needs of our changing world. Respectful dialogue, done as disputatio, forces participants to reconcile their views with their most basic values. It obliges them to confront their own wishful, but sometimes misguided or prejudicial thinking, and exposes them to a variety of ways of seeing and framing issues based on a diverse social context. Such a retrieval of a treasure from our Dominican storehouse can be an indispensable way to escape polarization and gridlock. On the issues that most polarize us, maybe we can learn to critically examine and present objectively our own cherished ideas first before entering the fray dialogue. Doing so will help guarantee the dignity of all involved. Respectfully listening to the other as the image and likeness of God then needs to be the first posture. Our Dominican brother that Sister Ann just quoted, a former master of the order, Timothy Radcliffe, says this as he reads the signs of the times and he sees the need to reappropriate disputatio, and I quote, "Today we have been seduced by a competitive form of debate, which is as blind and as violent as the struggle of species to survive in the Darwinian jungle, or as senseless as the struggle for mastery between Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola. But we are called to be a place of counterculture, of a different way of relating, through which one believes that one may learn something from those with whom one disagrees. This requires of us compassion and vulnerability." End of quote. I think our brother Timothy is correct. And so think about that as we now move on to looking at Catholic universities in the Dominican tradition today. And so what about this great place of education, Albertus Magnus College? Is this a place hospitable enough for disputatio? Can it be effectively modeled here so that all might respond courageously and compassionately to the signs of our times? Your mission statement, which was up earlier, states that the mission of Albertus Magnus College is to provide men and women with an education that promotes the search for truth in all its dimensions and is practical in its application. In another place, It is written here on the website. The college prepares students to become responsible, productive citizens and lifelong learners, encouraging them to contribute to their communities and to become moral leaders in a complex world. Wow. That's great homework, isn't it? Not only for here, but for everywhere. And before we respond with a yes, that this is such a welcoming home, we dig just a little deeper to acknowledge our Grace Foundation as a specifically Catholic institution. Individuals do not venture alone, but do so collaboratively and mutually, as all are encouraged to engage with diverse communities to pursue systemic, self-sustaining solutions to human, social, economic, and environmental problems that all are facing. So let's now turn to the conclusion. You're probably all going, it's kind of like at the end of Mass when the priest says the Mass is ended, go in peace. I began this presentation by describing the lack of civility and respect that permeates our culture, and I suggested that our Dominican tradition, through our institutions of Catholic higher education, have the ability to retrieve and reappropriate disputatio as a means of dialogue for mutual and respectful exchange about the holy and about the common good, particularly with those whom we might disagree. I conclude by saying that by engaging in the hard work of disputatio, we keep alive the memory of St. Dominic and our Dominican forebears, Catherine of Siena, one that we're celebrating this week, who valiantly served the mission of the Church and the Church's intellectual life. To live out of this mission in pursuit of veritas, truth, on our Catholic Dominican campuses is to be impelled to embrace and extend the gift of the mission towards the world. Disputatio, once learned and implemented in the classroom, can create environments where competing ideas, opposing ideologies, moral dilemmas of all descriptions, and cultural differences are appreciated, discerned, given a fair hearing, studied, discussed, and debated rationally and civilly. And such fruitful dialogue is built on both the Catholic Church's accumulative wisdom as well as its value of inclusive membership, and values so imperative when reading the signs of our times. To this end, one of our educational and formative goals as a Catholic university or college in the Dominican tradition should be to provide, both in the classroom and in other environments, opportunities in which students may participate and to practice civil discourse. In offering them these opportunities where differences can be acknowledged and disagreements can be worked through, we can help our students avoid rigidity of thought, demonization of our conversation partners that too often leads to polarization both within the Church and outside the walls of the Church. Stated a bit differently, Albertus Magnus' mission is to provide spiritual, intellectual, and social environments designed to attract, retain, and graduate students who pursue ethical professional careers and personal lives based on values undergirded by both faith and reason, and a commitment to peace and justice in the world. As a college established in both Catholic and Dominican traditions, there should be a high expectation for both faculty and students in their behavior, both in and out of the classroom. Just as assignments for a course are expected to be completed, it's the end of the semester right now, campus requirements to act civilly, respecting property and persons, should also be expected and met in this place. This respect should be extended to all of creation. I'm assuming that Albertus Magnus has performance standards for civility and respect for others just as important as standards for academic achievement. Why should we hesitate in creating communities of civility today, beginning on our college campuses, reflecting the truth which St. Dominic preached so powerfully and eloquently, first in his reverence towards others, and then by his words? Our preaching of God's truth can never be powerful or eloquent if its preachers are smug, know-it-alls or mealy-mouthed, weak-kneed relativists. That's not what we're about here. Rather, our disputatio, culminating in civility and respect in the academic arena, should be consistent with gospel values. You, as a Catholic college, must model transformation and provide opportunities for all to participate in transformative actions on behalf of the neighbor, whoever the neighbor might be. But here's the most important point. If you walk away with anything, don't miss this. You will be effective, we will be effective, not as steamrollers, but as those transformed first by the Spirit of God, who in both gratitude and humility act reverently and civilly to all, not just to those you consider deserving, but the undeserving alike. Others will respect us, invite us to participate, and consider ideas important if we demonstrate and model the fruits of the Spirit formed through disputatio. Then and only then will we have the opportunity to become a community that transforms culture. And in that process, your life will be shaped by the gifts promised by St. Paul in the letter to Galatians. And those gifts are these: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. That's what Paul invites us to be about in Galatians 5:22. And when we become that, what a difference that will make. Thank you for